Welcome to the Storied Outdoors. My name is Brad Hill, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend Brian Gill. And I'm a little jealous because he's sitting outside today when he's usually sitting inside. So if you're watching on YouTube, Brian has a very beautiful spring background that's not fake. It is very real, and I've sat on that very porch. It's great to see you sitting out there, my friend.
Well, let's hope nobody decides to blow leaves or
Yeah, absolutely.
something.
Yeah, absolutely. But man, I'm always surprised by who we get to talk to, and we just never know who we're going to get to talk to. And man, we are honored today to sit down over Zoom with Jim Barger. He's a nationally recognized trial lawyer. He's an author. He's an environmental advocate. He's a teacher. But beyond the law, he's an accomplished writer. He's written articles and essays for The Bitter Southerner, which I just learned about, I've been checking it out, and it's really cool. He's co-authored Jimmy Carter, Rivers and Dreams, which explores Carter's love for fly fishing. Lives on St. Simon Island, Georgia. He holds degrees in English and philosophy from Furman University and an MA in Southern Studies from Ole Miss. Do you still teach white-collar investigations at the University of Alabama? Still teaching there?
I sure do.
Awesome. And then, man, you serve on some boards too. One of those is to preserve Georgia's coast, which I love that kind of work, and we love that kind of work too, man. So, man, lots of irons in the fire and lots of things going on. But man, we're excited to really talk about Jimmy Carter, Rivers and Dreams. I love the byline. Was it rods and reels and peace deals?
That's right.
What a great little line. Maybe I was like, man, I'm ready to read. I'm ready to read this book. And
that hooked you right there.
It did. It was literally a hook in every perfect way. But man, we're just excited to have you, Jim, and thanks for carving out some time to sit down with us and share a little bit of your story.
Well, thank you. I'm really enjoying the opportunity to speak with you and listen to you guys as well. My wife, Birch, was the administrative dean of the divinity school, I think, when maybe Brian was there. And so I've had the opportunity at Sanford and had some opportunities to listen to y'all. You just have great conversations. They're very encouraging and soothing. So I'm happy to be a part of it.
Man, Jim, thank you so much. It was so funny. We were down at Dolphin Island not too long ago, and your book came up. I'm sorry, there's a bee around my head. Your book came up, and I was like, I really want to get Jim on there. I think I can because I know Birch, his wife. And then literally like within the week, Birch emailed us saying, hey, you think that you guys would be interested in having Jim on? I was like, well, this is just perfect. This is something that we wanted to do anyway. So, I am just so thrilled to have you here. Thanks for agreeing to be here with us and taking time out of your day.
Absolutely.
Man, Jim, you live in really a sportsman's sort of paradise over there on that beautiful island off the in Georgia. It's in Georgia. It's a part of Georgia. But you're on the beautiful coast, St. Simon's Island. I mean, golly, you have all kinds of things right at your fingertips.
Yeah, it's an amazing place. My wife and I both are natives of coastal Georgia and St. Simon's Island in particular. Yeah, I'm looking out right now out my window. I can see across to about a half a mile of marsh to Little St. Simon's, and then the ocean beyond that. It's pretty special. That's
awesome. To write a book about fly fishing and a president's love for fly fishing, I would imagine you probably have a love for the outdoors yourself. What are some early memories of you falling in love with the outdoors?
Well, I would say most of my early memories in the outdoors are vignettes, like a lot of us have, just moments in time that are frozen. They almost all involve my parents.
Mm.
My mother would take us to the beach every day in the summertime. We had a routine of getting up early and doing that, crabbing, clamming, things like that. And then my dad, was an avid outdoorsman. He didn't get the opportunity to go as often as I have in my life because he was a hardworking certified public accountant. And so, there were times of the year where he was up before dawn and after dark working, and that work ethic I watched in him instilled a lot in me. But he when he could go, he was always ready to go too, and so we always would go hunting, fishing. He and my mother are from a little town over in Alabama called Demopolis,
Oh
which is,
yeah.
you probably know of it. It's where the Tom Bigby and the Black Warrior come together on those high bluffs. Um, they've been together. They're in their 80s now, mid 80s, and they've started dating when they were 14.
Wow,
They've
that's
been
awesome.
together all those years, and we would leave from St. Simon's. We do all these coastal things, but outdoor activities. But every year we would drive to Demopolis, and we would actually hunt across the river in Sumter County, um, which, if some of your listeners know, it's one of the more rural counties in one of the more rural states. But uh, we would drive over, and we'd take 82 from St. Simon's all the way there. That rural highway runs the whole way, and we would. This for you, Brian. My dad would pull over on Lake Eufaula in 82.
Hmm.
And as we crossed in the middle of the lake, he'd pull over on the bridge there and roll down the windows so we could smell the fresh air because we'd gotten to Alabama. That's that's how deeply he felt and still feels about Alabama. We would spend the whole week every day deer hunting of Thanksgiving every year, and we would leave before daylight. Often we did some dog drives, old timey dog drives.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes old timey dog drives with horses or folks just beating the bushes with sticks. And we would sit on the back of pickup trucks for lunch. We wouldn't come back until after dark every day. The only day we came back for lunch was Thanksgiving Day.
Well, that's a
Um,
good day. That's a good day to make
yeah.
it back.
So those memories with him, with my mother, my sister and cousins and things were really the earliest memories. But it was always about being outdoors, hunting, fishing, doing something. If you had a moment that you took it to do those things.
That's good.
Um,
Hmm.
Living up there on the coast, that's like fell in love recently with the book The Old Man and the Boy,
mm,
Robert Ruark.
yeah,
And so,
Rourke.
yeah, up there where you live, it made me think about that when I was looking at St. Simon Island. I said, I bet that's a lot like what The Old Man and the Boy was like.
Yeah, that's a classic book. I mean, Rourke had wonderful books, but that's probably the top for me of his. I'm glad we share that in common.
Yeah, what a great book, man. Every time I go, this past week we were on our spring break. We were in Blue Ridge, Georgia, and got a cabin up there. And in
Yeah.
downtown Blue Ridge, there's a cool little bookshop there. I was like, oh man, maybe this will be the one, you know. And I go in and look
Hmm.
around and ask him. He's like, no, I don't have it. I've heard of it, but I don't have it. So I was kind of hopeful I could buy one off of eBay, of course, but it's a whole lot more fun to discover one in a bookstore. But
So have they gotten really expensive or something as a rare book or
not really. I just been looking for
yeah,
it. You know, I just like to have a copy of it, but I want to find
yeah.
one in a bookstore rather than just buy one off the internet. You know.
I've got a great over the course of my lifetime have it sounds like you also have collected outdoor writing, outdoor books. Got a huge library of outdoor books, but part of it is there's an old fella from here who was in his time, extremely famous shooter, clay shooter, um, named Fred Misseldine. He was still holds, holds more records and more trophies in clay shooting than anybody. He passed away about 15, 20 years ago now, but he hunted in Africa with Hemingway's guide, the same guides that Percival and others that were with Hemingway, and he
Wow.
just did amazing things. But he had this awesome outdoor library and all of the old Rourke books, every sort of classic book you can think of. And when his son, who lived in his home, decided to sell the home and move away, he knew that Mr. Fred and I had a special friendship. And so he left me most of that library.
Whoa.
I've got over 100 volumes of classic first edition outdoor
Wow.
book.
Wow.
Yeah,
What a
this
treasure.
that Cape Buffalo you see behind me, that was from Mr. Fred Misseldine. Shot that on his first safari.
Man, incredible.
It's from that particular buffalo is from the 30s.
Wow.
So yeah, I could go on and on about outdoor literature. Grew up reading more about the outdoors than I got to do. All these fantastic places and things around the world.
Yeah, a lot of adventures you can go on in those pages.
Yep.
Jim, you all didn't live in, like you said earlier, y'all lived in Birmingham for a while and
Mm-hmm.
then moved to St. Simon. What was kind of the impetus for that? Like, what were you trying to do for your family with that move?
So it's like a lot of things, you have plans for yourself, and you find out that God has different plans for you, or whatever it is. We were living in Birmingham. That's where I started my law firm. My law firm my law work is nationwide, so it doesn't really need to be anywhere in particular, but that's where we started as a natural flow from going to law school at University of Alabama. And then Birch, she worked for Samford, and really we kind of set down some feeder roots, probably not deep, not like the deep roots we have in other places, but we felt really tied to Birmingham. At the same time, we yearned for natural spaces and more rural place. And we initially said we were never going to move back to St. Simon's. That just kind of shocks people sometimes because we're both from here. I mean, Birch's family settled with the original settlement by Oglethorpe on St. Simon's in the 1700s, when
Wow.
Georgia was just a colony, and actually was, a lot of people don't realize this, Georgia was founded as a anti-slave colony. They banned slavery and hard liquor in Georgia when they first started it. And the hard liquor ban was more about the effects of slavery, given that, sugarcane production was what created rum. And so the founder of Georgia, General Oglethorpe, was an abolitionist. So Birch's family came over with that original. That's how far back they go, to the 1700s here. And yet,
Those aren't feeder roots.
no, those are deep roots, right?
That's a tap root right there, boy.
Yeah. Of course, my family's been here for over 50 years, which is a long time for places, but I told you about their connection and deep roots to Alabama. But my sister's here. All of our family are here. And we wanted, though, a place like St. Simon's was when we grew up. I think a lot of us have these memories of these places. I'm sure it's like this on the coast of Alabama, where things have changed. A lot of more people have come. It's got overpopulated in ways where, and so we just said we weren't going to come back and contribute to that overpopulation of a barrier island. I mean, you can't Other places they can spread out. A barrier island, you can't.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
just a finite piece of land.
Yeah, that's
So,
like if it's like Dauphin Island in Mobile, Alabama, it's not only is it not getting bigger, it's actually getting smaller sometimes.
yeah, that's right. They are moving and growing and shrinking. They're dynamic landscapes, as we coastal folks either know or learn the hard way. But
Yeah.
that whole biblical story about the parable of the man who built his house on the sand, it rings a little bit truer down here for where
Stings.
you are and where I am, right?
Stings a little bit.
Yeah. So anyway, we weren't going to do it. We kind of were dead set against it, and we looked for other rural places that were similar, and we found a few spots. We even put in contract on a couple of things that didn't fall through, to buy a farm and just live a more rural lifestyle. But we were down here one summer, and it was the wisdom of out of the mouths of babes kind of thing. I had my son James, who's now about to turn 18.
He's the football player.
Yeah, he's a big guy,
Big guy.
football player.
I told you when we talked on the phone, I think he might could take you, Jim.
Yeah, he I think he's almost to the point where he knows that now, but his will is not as strong as mine, so I think that.
Hey man, Dad's always got that little edge on you.
Yeah,
Well, you get to a certain point, you get dad strength.
that's right. Well, we're in the middle of answering a short question, really long, but I've got to divert when you say that, when we talk about raising kids and other things. And this may not be popular in this day and age to talk about corporal punishment, but when I was a quail hunting guide, I worked with a big boy from Clemson. He was a researcher for Clemson. He would put radio collars on wild quail. We'd catch them, put radio collars on them. His job was to trace them around the plantation. And he was talking one day about how big, I was saying how big he was. And he says, Daddy was really small, though. Lane was he was 6'4", 6'5", 340, 350, something like that. And he said that he did something, he couldn't remember what it was, but his dad told him to go get the belt. And he said he thought about it. He was about the size of my kid now, and his little daddy. And he said, Daddy, I think I'm a little bit too old. I think I've outgrown spanking. I think I'm a little too old for spanking. And I said, what did your dad say? He said he just leaned back in his chair and stretched up and said, oh, well, thanks for telling me that. I didn't realize that you had grown up to that knocking out stage. And I said, well, Lane, what did you do? And he said, I went and got the belt.
Yeah, you did.
And so, I'm not in any way advocating getting belts or anything like that or knocking out. But he loved his daddy, and they had a good relationship. But anyway, James is a baby. He was probably 5 or 6. I took him to the beach one morning. We were here for the summer, and we were renting a little house. And he said, we're driving back, and he said, Dad, you love this place so much. Mama loves this place so much. My papa's here. Mimi lives here. Aunt Melanie lives here. All my cousins live here. And I hear you and Mom talking about places to live and thinking about moving. Why don't we just live here? And it occurred to me in that moment that my frustration of other people coming to this beautiful place and overpopulating it didn't mean that we couldn't come here as well. We had as much of a right as anybody to be here.
Maybe more.
To help build community and build it the way. And we had a responsibility to do that. And so we did. We came and we made a couple of promises to ourselves. We weren't going to build anything new on a barrier island and contribute to the problem that we had seen. When we haven't done that, we move into existing house, and that we would be a net positive to the place. if we were going to come back here, we wouldn't just be consumers of the place and the community. We would try to be a net positive, knowing that we're taking, we got to give. And so we've tried to do that. I don't know that we've always succeeded, but that's been our goal.
Man,
That's
what a
incredible.
fantastic environment to raise your boys in. I mean, I see them. I follow Birch and you on Instagram, and just to see the opportunities that they have to be in the woods. I mean, to catch fish and then be hunting and all in the same day. And it's just like, man, you guys are really being intentional with your time with your kids.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Birch and I were just talking about how lazy our Easter weekend was, and I said, well, sometimes you just got to sit back and take a nap and read a book. It's nothing wrong with that,
That sounds like a great way to mix it in every now and then with a lazy day.
Yeah, I said, it wasn't 3 days before that you and I were paddling the Okefenokee Swamp. I mean, we get out and do enough. It's all right. We can
take pretty close to some alligators in the Okefenokee, didn't you?
Oh man, there's some big ones in there. It's an amazing place. It's really a place of global significance that I would recommend to everybody, within driving distance at least, to figure out a way to go check it out. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Wow. Jim, how many children do you have? Do you have two sons?
Two. I've got two boys. One's 18. Well, one's about to turn 18, and one just turned 14.
Yeah, almost to that knocking out stage.
Mm-hmm.
I won't remember that. I've got an 11-year-old son. Man, as I want to transition over and really get to digging into the book.
Yeah.
But as you spent time, in law, a long career doing that, your upbringing, and then, you spend time researching and interviewing and writing a book about Jimmy Carter.
Mm-hmm.
Of all those places and different influences, what are some nuggets of parenthood and especially manhood that you pulled in to instill into your boys, or you've attempted to and doing your best to instill into your boys?
Through my exploration of Jimmy Carter's life, or just
through him. I mean, you got lots of different places of wisdom gained, but that being certainly one of them that is rarer than most get to research and dig that deep into someone's life. I would say from there predominantly, but anywhere else, I'd love to hear that. Anytime we can glean as dads, me and Brian, we can glean any kind of a wisdom we can.
Jimmy Carter was a wellspring of wisdom. People stand on all sides of the political spectrum. They stand on all sides of religious belief and doctrine. But every time I would turn back to him, his speaking of, there's a 14-year-old. What you got? Check off the key. Okay, thank you, buddy. Key to one of our little outdoor areas, actually. Sorry about that. My 14-year-old, that was George, came in. He, I would recommend his books in particular. I mean, the man wrote 32 books.
Wow.
He wrote his last book. He was 95 years old, and it's one of his best. It's called Faith, A Journey for All. And I just found all sorts of ways to ground me, bring me back to the simple faith parts of our faith, the things that bring us together, whether it's enjoying creation, or whether it's just thinking about daily ways to, love our neighbors as ourselves. And that was he was an intense dude. He gets this, because he built his life around the principles of peace and love. I think he gets sort of this soft, people want to give him a soft treatment. And as we know, that's one of the hardest ways to live that there is. That's Jesus Christ died at 33 trying to live that life because people wouldn't let him, and he sacrificed for our sins as a result of it and gave us that example. But that's a tough way to live really, in the end of the day, to wake up every morning and say you're going to choose love over hate, or you're going to choose peace over war or conflict, or and so he always was able to bring it back to that. But I'll tell you, my encounters with him, he was an intense man. He was self-demanding. He would lock you with these crystal blue eyes and wouldn't let go, and it made you think to yourself, why am I not doing more?
Like, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah, what this guy, he says he wakes up, he's never woken up before daylight. His memoir is an hour before daylight. He grew up without water, without sewer, without they used bedpans. He had to go walk down and empty his great aunt's bedpan every morning. He didn't know anything but hard work. And so what that did was empower him to recognize that you can accomplish things. When he learned that river blindness was something that could be prevented, he said, well, why don't we prevent it? When he learned that guinea worm was preventable and it was destroying the lives of millions of people every day, he said, why don't we prevent it? And the last time I saw him, he was hanging on at 98, almost 99 years old, and he was hanging on to track the numbers of people from the millions that it had been who were being affected by guinea worm to the 4 left in the world. That was and it was all because he decided, hey, we can do this. So I think to myself, and I try to tell my boys, like, it wasn't just happenstance that we brought you into this world. Birch and I waited to have kids till, we thought we were financially ready. And I don't think that's necessarily the way that everybody should do it, but that's the way we did it. And we were very deliberate and thoughtful about the idea that we're going to have kids. And we wanted them to enjoy their lives. But again, we want them to be a net positive in their communities, wherever they are. We brought them into the world to be a blessing to people, not to just seek blessings for themselves. And, I think that you can find that throughout. Carter had a really rough, hard life as a politician, even as a farmer. He got beat up politically, and he made a lot of political self-sacrifices, things that he knew were going to make it hard for him to get reelected, but that would benefit us all down the road, like preserving 150 million acres of the Alaskan wilderness. They beat him to shreds over that. And now, it's in the book, his last trip there, he was 90 years old, caught a 28-inch rainbow.
Whoa.
And he would still never let anybody touch his fly rod. It's not like he worked that at 90 and was out there standing in the water fighting, what is considered to be the holy grail of trout fishing, just under 30 inches being that hole in one at the Masters kind of thing. But he had caught a 30-incher, but at 90 he did that and quietly was, at the end of the trip, they flew commercially and they just were in a little pizza joint having a beer and pizza and trying to keep a low profile and busy pizza restaurant, kids coming and going. And the other times he had been in Alaska, he did this, he preserved those lands, but when he was doing it, people hated him for it. I mean, they had at the Alaska State Fair a picture of Jimmy Carter and a picture of the Ayatollah Khomeini. And you could pay to throw bottles at these pictures. And the pile of glass was more than twice as big under Jimmy Carter's than it was Khomeini's.
Golly.
They burned him in effigy in Alaska.
Wow.
Yet he did it. He knew, we have to preserve these lands. He tried to balance all the interests, the business interests, the indigenous people's interests, but the long-term preservation of this wilderness that now has become, Alaskans have learned it's the best thing for their country, for their state, and the best thing for our country. But he was quietly sitting in the back of this pizza joint, and people started to recognize him. And, they didn't know, the little entourage wasn't sure how they were going to be treated. And slowly people started to stand up, and the whole place gave him a standing ovation.
Wow.
But he had to wait from 1976 to the 2020s, or 20 teens for that to happen.
Wow.
So I also want to tell my boys that, like, you're not here for affirmation from your peers. You're here for affirmation that you're doing the works that God has set forth for you, and that you're being a positive in your communities, and you're doing something lasting in your community, even if that's, something as simple as the guy who joyfully collects the recycling every week for us. Or if you're a president, it doesn't matter, the magnitude. It matters how you do things and how you contribute to your community. And what's been helpful for me is, you preach that to your kids enough, you got all of a sudden you got to start to try to live it yourself. Because I don't know that I was that way always, and I'm trying, and I'm not all that way still always. But
that's good.
I would say that kind of thinking that you enrich others will enrich yourself. Carter he never took a penny for a speech. He refused to profit off of the presidency. To his dying days, he still shopped in war clothes from Walmart. He was a man he was like us. He was a man of people, and he was never trying to enrich himself, but he was always seeking awesome opportunities to interact with people and nature. And so I think that's what I've taken from getting to dig deep, do a deep dive into his writings and spend time with him.
Was it because of his writings or something else that led you to take on this type of a book project?
So it was really organic in its development. He had a special affinity for St. Simons and the coast of Georgia. Being a native of Georgia, he was in Sumter County, Georgia, which is just West Georgia, Plains. He was actually from a little community outside of Plains called Archery. But when he decided to run for office the first time, well, I guess back up, he was a state senator. But when he decided to run for gubernatorial office, for the governorship, he needed to build coalitions. And so he came down to Glenn County, Georgia, and made friends with the local optometrist here. And they were introduced through mutual friends, and he said, "I want to run for governor." And my friend Dr. Carlton Hicks, who's in his late 80s now, said, "That's not for me. I'm not a politician." In fact, the way he first learned about Jimmy Carter was, this place where we're from is so small, he was answering his own telephone as a doctor to set up his own appointments. He couldn't really, didn't even need an assistant for that. And, when Jimmy Carter got on the phone, he said that voice and his persuasiveness, he convinced me that not only was this guy going to, who Georgia needed at the time to be governor, but that somehow I was the person he needed to help him become governor. And they became friends from that point on. Jimmy Carter, when he won his first we won the first presidential race, he gathered here on St. Simons to select his cabinet and bring his cabinet together here.
Wow.
And as a child, I met him. He was, I was actually just being babysat with some friends who were having dinner with him that night. And Secret Service were there. I remember it distinctly. President Carter says he remembers it, or said he remembered it, and he swore he'd never tell a lie. That's what he ran on, so I'm going to have to believe him. But it's hard to believe he'd remember a 6-year-old kid, when he had just been elected president. But anyway, I had that tie to him, and all those years, Dr. Hicks and Jimmy Carter became best fishing buddies, and Rosalind Carter, and they fished all over the world together. And at that time, the only people around here who fly fished at all were Dr. Hicks, myself, and my father. And so whenever Dr. Hicks would come back from a trip, from the time I was, young man in my early teens through graduate school, we would interact, and he would tell me, Jim, just got back from the Amazon fishing for peacock bass. You got to go do that. I've just gotten back from Patagonia. You've got to go do that. Well, we were talking about reading outdoor books. I've read all these books, and now I'm hearing these stories of all these places, and it did really inspire me to build my life around that kind of opportunity in outdoor travel. I would save money as a young man. And I went to almost all the places in the book, everywhere except Russia and Mongolia. I had a trip planned to Mongolia, but it got canceled back in the mid-90s when the State Department recommended no one travel there. But so I'd heard all these stories, and I was always hopeful I was going to get asked to go on one of these trips with the president. And then 2020 came around, and one of the places what the tradition they had was they would go to Spruce Creek, Pennsylvania to fish at this little cabin every year. And then while they were there, they would plan another international trip or bigger trip, and they would do that every year. So they'd always go on 2 trips every year. But one of them was always Spruce Creek. They went in May every year. 2020, the Carters can't go because of the pandemic. Their doctor said they're too fragile to be doing that kind of thing. He had just survived brain cancer. And it's still gone on that Alaska trip was after brain cancer. He went to Yucatan and fished for permit after brain cancer when he was in his mid-90s.
Wow.
Standing on the bow of a skiff,
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, you think about that. Like, some of these trips that I have been on to try to, I don't have the stamina to finish 7 days on the bow of a skiff looking for permit. I'm wiped after something like that. He's in his 90s trying to do that and doing it. But anyway, they couldn't go. And Rosalind was a big fly angler as well. She'd be the first one to tell you that too. But they ended up first one to tell you that she was probably better than most of the men that went on those trips. But they couldn't go, and so Dr. Hicks said, well, we're going to go anyway. My dad and Dr. Hicks and another friend of ours, 4 of us, loaded up in the car, and we drove all the way up there. And we took with us one of the president's fishing rods, one of his bamboo rods that had his name inscribed on it. And we took a box of his dry flies that he had tied. And we all took turns catching fish with hand-tied black ant flies. That was his favorite fly that he had tied with his rod. And it became a tradition. We've done it almost every year since. And on the porch of that, right there at Spruce Creek, on the porch of the cabin, Dr. Hicks and I decided these stories have never been told. They're not going to get told if we don't tell them. Let's just start doing it. So I recorded Dr. Hicks over a period of a couple of years, and most of the time people say, well, how long did it take you to write the book? And you say, well, 3 years. Well, a lot of it was condensed right during those trips to Spruce Creek, where I would have the recorded device going. And we did the way we orchestrated the book. Every chapter is orchestrated around a place where they went, whether it was you know, the Blue Ridge Mountains, or here in the United States, or whether it was Honduras or Venezuela or different parts of Russia. And each chapter begins with a collection of what I've put together through those recordings of firsthand narrative of Dr. Hicks, trying to capture his voice and put, it's more of a patchwork quilt of different conversations we've had that I try to put into one voice for him. And then a second section that is in my voice about the things that I learned about the Carter presidency or the Carter's life, or my own personal experiences in those places or similar places for fish and reflections. So that's how it came about. It wasn't that I said we'll set out to write that book. It was more that book came to us and we put it together.
Maybe some of the
It
best
feels like
moments.
it's you have successfully archived some things that might have gotten lost in history in time had you not written this book.
I hope so. I definitely think that's true about the personal anecdotes, the personal experiences where only those 4 anglers and their wives were there. And then I hope that I've also, created a new framework for looking at Jimmy Carter and his presidency and his post-presidential life, and sort of a different way for people to see it and through the lens of an outdoorsman. He was he could have easily just been a Robert Rourke type who just wrote books about his experiences in the outdoors, or a conservationist like Aldo Leopold. And his writing is very much like that, like a Sand County Almanac. But he was also a president, and he was also a peacemaker right up to the end of his life, and he saved lives. And you know what? The one thing he doesn't get a lot of credit for, and speaking to preachers and folks, is there's an argument to be made that Jimmy Carter was one of the most impactful evangelists in the history of Christendom. And I'll tell you why. When he was he actually was a door-to-door missionary. He did that as a missionary before he was a politician, before he knew he was going to be a national politician, when he was a failed state politician. He after his first gubernatorial run, and he lost. As a Baptist, one of the things you do is go do this time going door to door. And he went door to door up in New England, and he was paired with a Cuban American. I can't remember the guy's name right now, but they would go door to door, and Jimmy Carter would tell them, I don't really feel comfortable doing this, share my faith. I'm having a hard time, and you're just so good at it. People just invite us into their homes, and you talk, and how do you accomplish this? And he said that he learned one of the things that shaped his entire life after that was the guy said to him, Cruz was the man's last name. He said, I try to live my life with 2 loves in my heart every day. One is for Jesus, and one is for whoever happens to be standing in front of me at that very moment.
Ooh.
And that's what Jimmy Carter said. He tried to live his life that way. And so flash forward to the presidency, we have no normalized relationship with China. China is the largest population of humans in the world at that time, second to India, maybe. Don't quote me on that. But China had a specific ban on Bibles, on all religion at that time, worship of any kind, and a ban certainly against missionaries. So Jimmy Carter meets with and develops a relationship with Deng Xiaoping, and which ultimately normalized relations with China. And they got to be such friends that on the last state dinner they had, Deng said to Jimmy Carter, you have been such a good friend. You have opened up so much for the Chinese people. Is there anything that I can give to you personally?
Ooh.
And Jimmy Carter said, there are three things that you can give me. And Ding said, okay, tell me what they are. And he said, one, you can allow Bibles back into China and make it where everybody can read a Bible freely if they want to. Two, you can allow freedom of worship in China, in your country. And three, you can allow missionaries to come back into China. And Ding said he was shocked, first of all. Those were not the things he was thinking. He was thinking, and he said, I'm going to have to think about that. And he went back, and the next day he came back to Jimmy Carter, and he said, I'll give you two of the three. You can have your Bibles, and you can have your worship. But he said he had seen personally how missionaries had talked down to the people, to Chinese people, and denigrated their culture, and he wasn't going to allow that to happen. So he would give two of the three. And now China is the largest producer of Bibles in the world. Millions of people have come to the Christian faith since that moment. So, you can arguably say, like, the effects of Jimmy Carter in that one moment to ask for that one thing, that he would allow this huge population of people who had been forbidden freedom of religion, been forbidden access to the Christian Bible. It's hard to deny the effects of that alone.
I've never heard that story.
Yeah.
That feels like that's the definition of that verse that talks about being ready in season and out of season. I mean, that was just an opportunity. He could have asked for anything from that guy.
Anything.
Yep. And most of us would probably have thought of different things, probably, right?
Yeah.
And he wasn't prepared, like you said. I mean, he didn't know he was going to get a personal opportunity to get something and push something. But in that moment, this is all I want. I want people to be able to have access to the Word.
Wow.
That's incredible. How much of and this wasn't in my list, but I just thought of it as we were talking. I mean, from a president's, their calendar, they're doing so much when it comes to foreign policy. They're traveling all over for foreign policy. How many times did he take advantage of? Well, since we're in New Zealand or somewhere, can we build in a couple of days to swing by a river?
Yeah. He did a lot more of that after the presidency. He post presidency, he made fishing a part of everything. If there was some, wherever they were, one of the first things he wanted to know beforehand was, what can we catch with a fly? And he also was deft at using angling to bring people together. One of the failed ways in which he tried to do that was when he was as a president, he was negotiating the Camp David peace accords between Egypt and Israel. And he wanted to take everybody fishing one day to break the tension. They had really had a tough time. It didn't look like they were going to get peace. And he gets to the point where they're supposed to go fishing, and he realizes this is not going to happen. We're not going to, I'm going to pull up exactly because I want to read to y'all what happened or make sure I get this right because it's pretty important. But he gets to the point where they're going to go, that he had planned to take the two factions fishing. And he says, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to come up with a different plan. So they're right there at Camp David, which is not far from in Pennsylvania. It's not far
from the cabin?
Gettysburg.
Oh, wow.
Gettysburg.
Oh.
So he says, let's go visit Gettysburg. And he takes the two factions there. and they walk the fields where everyone has, you know, all these men have died, and
Wow.
in this senseless war.
Mm.
And of course, you know, he's hoping what will happen is that they will begin to think about the respective uh, constituencies at home that are going to die in senseless wars in the same way, and the blood that's going to soak their own land. But he's not getting very far. A lot of the factions are talking back and forth. They're beginning to open up. Now, he's got both factions had military men with them who would have and did study that battle and knew everything about that battle. As you in military history, you learn that stuff. But Begin is not really opening up, and he's not. They're not getting where they think they need to be, or at least Carter doesn't think they are. I can't find it in the book. In your own book, you can't find this stuff, but this is in the book. But Carter looks up, and everybody's kind of standing solemnly, and Begin starts to recite the Gettysburg Address from memory.
Carter was?
What's that?
Carter did?
No, Mitchum Begin, the Israeli prime minister, who had been hard to crack. And everybody stops and just listens. Sadat listens. I think it was Begin. It was either Begin or Sadat. One of them, Anwar Sadat, recited it, and everybody stopped and listened. And they went back to Camp David, and they were able to get that peace accord, which now is the longest running peace accord in the history of the Middle East. And if you think about where we would be if Egypt entered into this conflict that we're in now, if that peace didn't hold, it's incredible. And the afterwards, Mincham Begin and Anwar Sadat both said that they both got Nobel Prizes for that, and Carter didn't. Carter later got a Nobel Prize for his work as an ex-president, the only ex-president to ever get a Nobel Prize for work done after the presidency. But they said really it shouldn't have been called the Jimmy Carter Accords because he made it happen. You know, we would have walked away, and it shouldn't have been the Camp David Accords, and he should have gotten the award. But you know what Carter said, and I thought, you know, it goes back. You just think about how he was always able to bring it into simplicity. You know, the conflict between these men and their respective cultures was a conflict, as we know, based on religion, right? And differences with religion. And Carter said it was our shared faith that caused us to come together because we are all sons of Abraham. He said the one thing we had in common is we're all sons of Abraham. And I thought, God, that is just so powerful and so correct, you know? All three of those faiths have that in common. You know, instead of trying to think of all the things that they had in differences, what do we have in common? We are all sons of Abraham. And I just, you know, then he said, and then he quoted, and he said, and in my faith, Christ has taught me, and we all believe that blessed are the peacemakers. And so my job is to bring peace. And that's how he did it. But I thought, what an amazing thing to turn the very source of a conflict into the source of a resolution.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, he did that. He was constantly doing stuff like using fishing, and you know, as I said, that evolved from fishing to another thing because they were so angry they couldn't even fish together. But he brought the different capitalist and socialist factions in Venezuela together through fishing, and brokered peace there after the presidency. And his trips to Mongolia and Russia were all about fishing, but they also fostered different peace and other. And he was frequently, if he was going one place, he might stop another place to fish first. So he was going to Myanmar. He was going to do another trip where he could work that in and get his friends to meet him and fish.
My goodness.
Yeah.
These stories are all in the book.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
All and more. I hope that you get a chance to read it. I mean, there's so many wonderful things you could be reading. I never tell people you need to read my book because there's so many other great things to read. But I do think this particular piece about Carter is fresh in this moment where we have somebody who really, entered into for a period the political scene, but spent his entire life trying to follow God's will for what he thought was a way that he could be a blessing to the world, and then who just truly enjoyed nature, thirsted for it. His fishing, he was always the first one out. They said you couldn't beat him onto the water and you couldn't beat him coming off the water. He was always going to be the first in, last out. Those trips to Russia that he took, it's really kind of not coincidental, but he went to the Far East in Kamchatka, and he went to the Far West in Murmansk, up near the Arctic Circle, two of the most remote places in the earth. I mean, there's no land way to get to Kamchatka in the Far East overland. There's no overland route. Have to go by ship or plane.
Wow.
To cross the tundra, just to, you'd die trying to cross the tundra to get there. But both of those places, when he was president, he said were the places that weighed on him most heavily, because that was where the Russians on both sides had their nuclear arsenals pointed at the United States. But yeah, he was pushing 90 in Murmansk, and it doesn't get dark until 2 a.m. He was still out there fishing at 2 a.m. They said he would be out there.
He and me and Brad.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. I don't know if you guys have ever fished for Atlantic salmon, but they are hard beaten fish, and they will beat you down, and you have to cast these big spay rods to get them.
Say, like, that's the fish of 1,000 casts, isn't that?
Yeah,
I've heard that said many times.
So listen to this statistic. This, as an outdoorsman, you will be like, what? So they're in Russia, and I've fished for those fish many times, and just catching one of them, once you catch them, will wear you out. The stamina to do it. But between Roseland and Jimmy Carter, they caught in a week, now in their late 80s, over 50 Atlantic salmon.
Wow.
2 of which topped 16 pounds.
Holy cow. Oh,
gosh. 16-inch rainbow will fight you hard. We're talking about 16-pound Atlantic salmon. And I wrote this in the book. To put that in perspective, that means that over the course of a week, as they both approached their 9th decade on Earth, the president and first lady each spent 2 to 5 hours per day in a remote wilderness fighting salmon, standing in the middle of the streams too. They weren't.
Yeah, with current pushing on them.
The current pushing them. Not to mention fighting the ones that got away and the numerous smaller grayling and sea trout that they also caught, as well as the effort exerted each day repeatedly casting to fish that never took the fly.
Oh, man.
Wow.
I mean, so when you look at him, when you meet, as I was saying, how tough he was, you sit down with him and he stares at you, those crystal blue eyes, and you think, what am I doing with my life? I mean,
My goodness.
Am I going to be doing that at 90?
People are slowing down at like 70.
On their own pension and their book writing. It's not like they were, we like to think about presidents having money to do all these things. Like, they had to save up. They lived in the same 3-bedroom ranch house that they lived in before the presidency. They were in a tiny, poor hamlet in southwest Georgia. It's not like they had crazy incomes or anything like that, but they were still planning these trips, doing these things. It's just intense.
Wow.
How much of in your research? How much of the did you get fishing? Did you get to do in your research? Just like trying to grasp like what they were doing.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, luckily for me, I had, as I said, been to all of the places in the book or similar places, not the exact lodge necessarily, or like
Sure.
when they went to fish for peacock bass in Venezuela, I, when I fished for peacock bass, it was just south of there in Amazonia, but Amazonia in Brazil. So I wasn't always in the same exact spot, but been to uh, Patagonia and places like that several times, and um,
That
so
must
I
have been
had done a
terrible.
lot of that already. The only place I hadn't been was the Yucatan. I mean, I had fished for those species, tarpon, bonefish, permit, but not in the Yucatan. So I made that trip. I could make it to finish the book. And the other two places I wanted to make to finish the book wasn't able to do were Russia and Mongolia. It became at the end, as we were trying to get it done, the Carter Center and others wanted us to get that book finished for his 90th birthday or his
Mm.
100th birthday in October of last year. And so it just became not possible for me to schedule those last two
Yeah.
trips. But yeah, I spent a lot of time in the place that meant the most to him, which was Spruce Creek, and staying in the same little cabin with his best friend. One of his best friends was a dairy farmer who owns it. It's on the dairy farm up there. Um, and then I went specifically to the Yucatan to the same spot. And I got to meet the guides that he fished with when he fished there. Um, and that was kind of neat. But I didn't otherwise have to go to a lot of those places. Already been to them. I do want to finish it out, and eventually we'll go to Russia, hopefully, and Mongolia. It's not a great time to try to go to Russia.
Yeah.
um, in Mongolia, they were fishing for taimen. I don't know if y'all. So
I'd
taimen
have to
are
look that up.
it's the largest salmonoid species in the world.
Hmm.
You're talking about salmon, or not salmon, but a trout-like species
Hmm.
that can be 3 to 4 feet long.
Holy
Massive,
mackerel.
uh, massive salmon, ancient species. One of the
Dinosaur looking.
yeah, been around forever. The only place that they exist now is in Mongolia and in parts of the far east of Russia,
Hmm.
just north of Mongolia. And the president had been to Mongolia on trips, President and First Lady, to look at economic development and other things, and trying to. And when he learned that there was this ancient, massive species that would eagerly take a fly, he decided, well, I'm going to get my buddies
Uh,
together and we're going back. And so they did.
well, while we're here,
Yeah. And they stayed in yurts right on the river there,
awesome.
with Mongolian tribes people hosted them. And the funny thing is, Dr. Hicks said, it was a similar situation like casting for Atlantic salmon. You're spay casting or using switch rods, and it's a lot of work all day on the river. These fish, and if you catch one, they fight like the dickens. And so he was always tired at the end of the night, Dr. Hicks, who's 10 years younger than the president.
Mm.
And he said the president afterwards, and they were, I guess in their 70s and 80s doing this. The president, he always wanted to do something at night afterwards. So after they would come out, and he would go out at night with flashlights to just spotlight for animals, looking for animals. And when they'd come off the river, somebody had the local Mongolians had shotguns, and so they would go out there and they would do upland bird hunting for the birds similar to like the bird hunting that you have in desert areas in the south, in our southwest here.
Like a grouse like bird?
Yeah, it's some kind of particular grouse species that is native to that place.
That's awesome.
But he'd come back with dinner. He'd go out. He'd just, and Carlton said, I would just be passed out on the bed, just worn out. And he was going out to go get dinner and they cooked him up and had big, he's just
awesome.
an amazing outdoorsman. And it's the stamina. I think it comes from being a child of the Great Depression and living in Southwest Georgia, being raised a certain way by his father that you had to work, always had to be doing something, building something. He was an incredible woodworker. Most of the furniture in their home, when you visit with him, he had made it.
Wow.
He made his own furniture. He was also real innovative. He made this is kind of funny. He carved these tippet holders that he invented for wrapping your tippet around, so you could have different pre-tied tippet leaders. This is like in the 1980s, long before, he's making his own tip leaders and then tying them around these wooden things that he had created, and he carved in there each size of the tippet. You have these little tippet holders, and he gave one to Carlton Hicks, the Dr. Hicks I wrote the book with. And Dr. Hicks, he had it framed in a box, shadow box, with the letter that said it was from Carter, and it was on White House stationery. This was made in the White House. So I guess I said 80s. This would have been the late 70s. He had carved this and given it to Dr. Hicks, and Dr. Hicks frames it with the letter with White House stationery, and he hangs it on his wall in his office. Well, Dr. Hicks was their optometrist all these years. He actually gave them they would come down to St. Simon's to get their eye exams. And Jimmy Carter got really mad at Dr. Hicks when he saw
he wasn't using it. He was
not using it. He's like, I did not make this with some decoration. Get that out of there. What are you doing? It's not a memento. It's for a purpose.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Jim, how has writing this book changed you as a person?
It's a good question. I might have to think about that quite a bit. I do think it has made me realize, it has bolstered my resolve to try to be an influence for good in the community where I live, to do the things where I can and not to get affected by the things I can't do something about. And that statement about having two loves in your heart, I've tried to internalize that more. It's a simple tool, for which you can live out your faith, that'll help you live out your faith. I have also tried to realize there are periods of great, up and down periods, and we all get them. And after the presidency, Jimmy Carter, I think, if he had been the kind of person who would recognize that he needed counseling, or he would have probably been diagnosed as being depressed in that period. He was really down, did not think that he had accomplished the things that he could accomplish, felt like he had failed the American people in ways, but also felt like a lot of the good things that he did weren't being realized, and might be undone. And, he'd been soundly rejected by the American people. He didn't just lose, he lost big. And it was an ideological loss where, he's thinking we need to be beacons of peace and hope, and set an example for the world in that regard. And, he was beat down by the Iran hostage crisis. He kept working all throughout, and one of the reasons he wasn't able to campaign during that time was because he was so intent on trying to free the hostages. He was haunted by the failure of the helicopter mission, where there were service people who died based on his order to do that. But so this is in the book, and it is an untold part of his story. He was really despondent, and they loaded up that summer after he lost the election, and in a camper van, him, Rosalind, and President Carter and their youngest daughter Amy, and drove up to Spruce Creek. And it's hard to imagine a president loading up in a camper van and driving like that. But they did. And when he got there over the course of that week, he started to realize this idea of, okay, well, what can I do to change things? What can I do now and not worry about? And that's when he started his work with Habitat for Humanity. He and Rosalind personally worked on and built over 4,000 homes in the course of their life, their post-presidential life, hammer and nails. He was doing that again. I mean, I keep harping on this, but he was well into his 90s working on houses. And people who worked on houses with him said, like, he was tireless and a bit of a tyrant out there about making sure people are working. There's a story where Garth Brooks did a lot of those houses with him in later years. And Garth Brooks said President Carter walked up one day and Garth was sitting down. He said, "Garth, what are you doing?" He said, and he said he looked over at President Carter and he said, "I'm just having a rest." And he said I forget what his response after that, but it was essentially like, "Get back to work. What are you have
we ain't here to rest. We're here to work."
Yeah. And there's a picture of President Carter. He fell and hit his head working on one of those things, and he had got all these stitches in his head, and he was in his 90s when that happened, and he was back at it the next day with a big old bandage and stitches in his head, and he's working on building houses. So I think that's the thing to me, is that when you're at your lowest and you think you can't do anything, and we all get there, and just realize there's always something that you can do, some way that you can turn and pivot, and God's got a plan for you. He's really got a plan for other people through you. Another, my parents always told me, God has a plan for you. He has a plan for your life. And that really did influence me, and it still does. But I've come to realize that God has a plan for communities and people and the earth. And it's a plan that he wants to execute through you.
Yeah. That's that. The two loves goes back to that two loves, it's love for Jesus and love for the person in front of you,
Yeah.
And which obviously connects directly to the greatest commandment. Jesus has asked that. What's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind and your strength. And the second one is greatest is first. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's the embodiment of that.
That's right. And that's so simple, right? Jesus made it really simple for us. And what I try to tell sometimes my sons will get into debates. Sometimes I'll get into debates. We have all these different denominations, and we all believe different things. But sometimes, we can get really tied up in that. I just try to remind myself, and I joke about it, but this is true, is like, those are two things that are the greatest commandments, right? Once I've mastered those, I'll start to worry about the rest of it. I hadn't done, I can't even get the first two down. Yeah. Y'all are talking to me about this, that, or the other, or this doctrine or that doctrine.
I'm still working on
You're way ahead of me, because I'm still working on those first two.
Come on.
And I think that's what Jimmy Carter brings. It keeps bringing it back to simply. It's like, just, or Mr. Cruz is just another way of saying that same thing of, look, love your neighbor as yourself. The other thing I love about that, and I think sometimes gets overlooked, and I try to remind myself about, is the middle part of that verse, right, that you just quoted, is the other one is like unto it.
Yeah.
And that phrase, like the other one is like unto it, it's not a throwaway phrase. It's really important, because a lot of times we may not feel very close to God. I mean, I know that happens to me and has happened in periods of my life, and it also happens in periods of every day of my life, where I don't feel that close to God, or, I don't really know how to uh, honor God with all my heart, soul, and mind. But I can do that other one. It's a concrete thing that can be done. Just love the person in front of you, your neighbor, whoever they are.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And God gave us this wonderful, Jesus gave us this wonderful moment where we said, this is like the other. If you will love your neighbor as yourself, it's like loving me. If you can't figure out how to get deep into your personal walk with me, go love your neighbor. It's like it, you know.
Mm.
And it'll bring you eventually to that point of closeness with God, or
That's
at
good.
least it has for me every time I've felt distant and I've said, okay, I'm in a bad place here. I don't feel like I'm close to God. Well, I'm just going to go serve somebody. And if I can
Mm.
do that, it usually brings me back around.
That's
Mm.
good.
That's good.
What's man, we always love to sort of close. I mean, we could talk for hours,
Gosh,
obviously.
I know. We just getting started.
I was looking at the clock and I was like, man,
Oh wow, yeah,
there's
we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes or something like
a
that.
lot more that that we could talk about and ask about. But you said something about possibly finishing the adventures of for the book of you know Russia and Mongolia.
Yeah.
But what are some your next adventure, your next thing on the horizon for you now?
Well, in a couple of weeks, I'm gonna go up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and fish for steelhead,
Oh
which
Oh
has
wow,
man.
it's become a tradition that I do with my law partner. We go in the fall, we take the bird dogs up there, and we will hunt for grouse and woodcock. And in the spring, we come back and we fish for steelhead. That
man,
part of the country is it's a beautiful place. I don't know if you guys have spent much
never
time up
been,
there,
never
but
been.
it's wild. It's one of the wildest, the great woods. It's up there where Hemingway wrote the Big Hearted River and Big Hearted River Part Two that ends his first book, In Our Time, which I would highly recommend. But
Mm.
I just love it up there. So we're going up there. We'll spend about a week fishing for steelhead. That's in just a couple of weeks, I guess.
That's awesome.
In the
Oh
meantime,
man.
I'm going to try to take my nephew, who's down from New Hampshire, this weekend. We're going to go paddle the Okefenokee together. So
Awesome.
those are the two next, most immediate things on the horizon.
Sounds good to me.
Man, that
Yeah.
sounds amazing.
Jim,
That's awesome.
Jim, last thing, what are ways people where can they buy the book and how can they support this effort of telling these stories?
Well, so you can get the book. The easiest way to get it is directly from the publisher, the Bitter Southerner.
Yeah.
And the publisher has graciously offered your listeners a discount
Okay.
on the book,
Sweet.
discount code.
Oh, that's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, I think the code is the title of your podcast. So if they get to the
Nice.
point of checkout and they type that in, they'll get a code, or they'll get a discount. It's also available in most independent bookstores. My particular publisher that published this book is somebody I've written for a while, and when they heard I was working on this book, they kind of jumped on it and said, "Don't let anybody else have a shot at it." But one of the quirks of theirs, which I think is interesting and good, but it can be frustrating, is that they don't like to sell through Amazon or any of the big. They want only going to go through independent bookstores or through um, this sort of part of their ethic. So,
That's cool.
Well,
you won't
that's
find. I just
respectable.
say that to remind because a lot of my friends will say, well, "I look for your book on Amazon, can't find it." Well, you kind of have to work hard to keep your book off Amazon. It's actually not that easy to not have. But they've done that. So you can go to the Bitter Southerner, and if you type in that discount code, you'll get a discount. But if you go to your local independent bookstore, they probably have it, and if they don't, they'll order it for you.
Is it the Storied Outdoors or Storied Outdoors
I
for
think
the
it's
code?
Storied Outdoors.
stories, not the storied.
Yeah, just Storied Outdoors.
Awesome.
But I can confirm that for you and be sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Sweet. Yeah, we'll put it.
try one. If you try one and it doesn't work, try the other one.
That's awesome. I think one of my last questions, and it's very literally a surface question: why a permit on the cover?
Well, that's part of the story, and I have always found in writing that it's nice to have a mystery, something that will keep people wanting. So if you notice, it's rods, reels, and piece deals plus the one that got away. And there's a metaphor in there, but permit is the last fish they go for, and permit is the most difficult fish. It's sort of the fish that, self-flagellants are willing to go after. People like Jimmy Carter who are willing to try the impossible. So it's a symbol, it's a metaphor,
Awesome.
but it's also, there's a story in there, and you got to get to the end to decide.
Can't wait to read
That's why, we looked at putting a picture of the president or different things, and ultimately we had this great artist who came up with this permit cover, and it's a mystery. You got to read it. You got to read it to the end to figure it out.
Let's go. I love it. A little foreshadowing.
That's right.
A little cliffhanger.
Put the fly out there and see if somebody rises. Right.
That's right.
Jim, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. Brad's about to kind of close us up with our signing off. But man, this has been a joy, and I would love to do this again sometime and just hear about some more adventures. I can't wait to get the book. My wife and kids and I are going to be over on Jekyll Island after Memorial Day, and doing some camping, and it may be hot, but we'll have a fan.
Yeah, well, look us up when you come to town, and we'll maybe we can see you. But
that'd be fun.
It's been a joy for me. I feel like I've just rambled on, but I've enjoyed it.
Oh,
wow,
man.
Thank you. Joy was ours.
Man, absolutely. Man, so many stories, things that I've never heard, and we love a good untold story. That's part of what we're searching for, and uncovering those. And so that's been just a joy to hear, and really a joy to hear about someone you've seen from afar. At our age, we didn't experience a whole lot of, we saw more of his post presidency, right?
Mm-hmm.
But someone you've seen a lot of, but to get a look into their life as a fisherman is really, really cool, and man, eye opening and no mistake for sure. So man, it's been really a rich conversation, and I hope people do find the book and get into it, because man, a lot of these books, whether it is the Old Man and the Boy or Rivers and Dreams, man, and they really impact us, and we really learn from them, if we're really reading and taking it in. And man, I look forward to being able to take in these stories and let them shape us, because that's what the real ethos behind our podcast is. The stories that shape us, these things that shape us. That's why we wanted to ask that question of, how did this book change you? Like, these stories do have a big part in shaping who we are. And so we hope it inspires people to get out there and have the same kind of stamina to stand in the river. I hope I'm fishing when I'm 90. If I make it to 90, I hope I'm out there casting a fly rod, and man, have that kind of stamina. I'm still amazed at that, because I'm like you. I get a little tired standing on the front of the skiff if I'm out there. So that's impressive. But man, just to be inspired to live that way, and to really have that two loves, that love for Christ and love for the person that's in front of you, and to be able to do that on a skiff or in the river, man, that's where it's at. So I hope it inspires people to do that. Get out there, write some stories, share some adventures in the place we love to call the Storied Outdoors, because that's where the good stories happen.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please take some time to leave us a review, or better yet, share it with a friend. We hope these stories encourage you to write your own stories and share your own adventures in the Storied Outdoors.